Hi, this is Brad Straley with Jacksonville For Life. Today we have pro-life speaker, advocate, author, and founder of Abortion Survivors Network, Melissa Ohden. Melissa, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Tell us about how you came into the world.
Yeah, it's one of those stories that people often don't hear about. I am actually the survivor of what our world would call a failed abortion. So an abortion just simply didn't succeed in ending my life. And it was nearly 40 years ago, in August of 1977, that abortion occurred. And, what I know about the circumstances around my birth is that really my birth mother fits most statistics when it comes to abortion. She was 19. She was a college student. She wasn't married to my biological father. And the greatest statistic she fits is one that really isn't talked about in our society, and that's coercion. We often hear those words choice and right thrown around so much. But when you peel away those statistics and you listen to women's experiences, what we often find is that most women report having very little choice. And my birth mother was one of those women. I actually know now that her abortion was actually forced upon her. She had no intention of having an abortion. She wanted to parent me, to keep me, and her mother, my maternal grandmother, was a prominent nurse in their community and had a very strong and close working relationship with the local abortionist. And so that's how that forced abortion occurred. My grandmother and the abortionist forced it upon her, believing that nobody would ever find out what they did to her, and they would most certainly never find out about me. But here I am today.
Thank God. So the abortion that you survived was a saline infusion abortion. Can you tell us a little bit more, about that? And of course, big thing, how you survived it.
Yeah, that's the burning question, right? How do these things happen? That saline infusion abortion was the most common abortion procedure back in the 1970s. It involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding the baby in the womb. And the intent of that toxic salt solution was to poison the child to death. So if people read about it, they often, will read about how that toxic salt solution would peel away the top layer of skin as it was burning the baby and poisoning. And literally that baby would be poisoned to death, and the skin and organs would be burned up. And typically lasted about 72 hours after the baby's life was effectively ended by that toxic salt solution. Then premature labor was induced, and in that final step, then the deceased child would be delivered. My medical records actually indicate that I soaked in that toxic salt solution for 5 days.
Oh, my goodness.
The procedure lasted longer than what was normal because they tried time and time again to induce my birth mother's labor with me, and I just was not budging. And finally, on that 5th day, they succeeded, and I was delivered at a hospital, St. Luke's Hospital in Sioux City, Iowa, believing that I would be this successful abortion, of course, a deceased child, and, of course, lo and behold, I was born alive. People in our world actually call what happened a dreaded complication of abortion, a child who actually lives.
Sort of speechless after hearing what the left would call a miracle.
Yeah.
What do you know about the history of saline abortions?
Yeah, well, and the saline was, like I said, the most common procedure back in the 70s, and they stopped doing it routinely. I mean, you'll see it on the books here and there under the CDC information, but it isn't done routinely anymore, and for a couple of reasons. First of all, because of the greater risk to women's health. There were a lot of complications for women and a lot of fears for women's health. And the other part is that, frankly, too many of us lived. I've heard it time and time again. Too many children survived the saline infusion abortion. And so they stopped doing it and found more effective methods to make sure that children like me would not be born alive.
Now, are you healthy today?
That's another burning question, right? I am. time and time again, this is not what was supposed to happen in the human sense of the word for me. When I was born alive, I weighed a little less than 3 pounds. I weighed 2 pounds, 14 ounces, which actually communicated to the medical professionals that my birth mother was further along in her pregnancy than what the abortionist indicated in my records. So he first noted he thought she was about 20 to 22 weeks pregnant. But the fact that I was able to survive and I weighed that big amount, right, actually pointed to the fact she was probably about 31 weeks pregnant with me when the abortion was forced on her. So here I was, a little less than 3 pounds. I suffered from severe respiratory problems, jaundice, suffered from seizures for a period of time, and the doctors were very cautious about the prognosis for my life, for the prematurity and, of course, because of the abortion procedure. So they first indicated they didn't think I would live for very long. My body actually presented itself in a way that they thought I had a fatal heart defect, but structurally there's nothing wrong with my heart. But they were very guarded and went on to say, if I did live, I would suffer from multiple disabilities. And all of those prognoses about my life were absolutely wrong. Not only did I survive, but I am perfectly healthy today.
What a blessing.
Yet another miracle, right?
Yep, you are right about that. So not long after you survived this abortion attempt, you were adopted, correct?
Mm-hmm, yeah, my parents first met me when I was still in a NICU, and I'm forever grateful that no matter what the doctor said about what my life was going to look like, my parents were not deterred by that whatsoever. And, parents often say the moment they laid eyes on me, they fell in love with me. And I know my parents' love is part of the reason why I'm here today, because they loved me and they believed in me. And so I went home to them less than 3 months after surviving that failed abortion. I was healthy enough to go home to them. And, was raised in a home that was full of faith and where we knew that adoption was an incredible blessing. And I didn't know the background to my adoption. I was simply raised to know that I was adopted and loved. I did not know that I survived that failed abortion.
How did you find out about the failed abortion?
Yeah, I was actually 14 when I found out, and it was, I guess some people would call it an accident, but it is certainly not an accident in God's sense of things. My older sister, who's also adopted, faced an unplanned pregnancy as a high school student. And even though we were raised in a home with very firm beliefs about life and adoption, like so many women, my sister had a lot of fears. And so she was considering all of her options, and that included abortion. And when our parents found out about that, they broke their silence and told her the story of my survival because they wanted her to understand the type of decision she was considering. And so my sister was told the story of my survival, and not long after she found out, she let it slip to me that there was more to the story of my life. And all of that kind of culminated with me sitting our mother down one night and asking her to tell me what the story was about my life. If there was something more, what would it be? And that night my mom had to speak words that no parent really should ever have to say. She said, Missy, your biological mother had an abortion during her pregnancy with you, and you survived it. And that was almost 26 years ago now. And that night truly changed my life forever.
How thinking back to a 14-year-old girl, how did that affect you finding out, knowing your whole life that you were adopted and you were given up for adoption for some reason that you might not have known then, but to find out, by the way,
somebody tried to end your life.
Yeah,
right?
thanks for finishing that for me. Yeah. How did that affect you when you were 14?
Well, and that's exactly what it felt like, right? Like, by the way, someone tried to end your life. And so it turns everything on its head. I suddenly didn't feel so loved. My parents raised me to know that my birth parents loved me, and suddenly I felt, well, that can't be true. And, I was angry for a period of time that somebody would make that decision about my life. And I was scared because I really didn't know who I was anymore. I was scared about what my life was going to look like. I was ashamed. I felt embarrassed because I had never heard of things like this happening and had never heard of anybody like me. And, even back then, I knew what the world had to say about abortion and about children who are aborted. By and large, it isn't always positive in our wider secular culture. And so, all of those things weighed on me very heavily, and it was a struggle. This is not initially who I wanted to be 26 years ago. Now I wouldn't change a thing. But it was very difficult and certainly turned my pain inward. I struggled deeply, developed an eating disorder, struggled with alcohol abuse, even though those weren't things that would have originally entered into my life, I don't think. But that is because I didn't want to be this person who was in so much pain. The beauty in that is that I didn't stay in that place for very long. And really, I know God saved me from myself and truly, put me on a path to where I am today, which was to start looking for my biological parents and trying to obtain my medical records, knowing that I was supposed to share this story with the world someday.
Amen. Amen. This is Brad Strahler with Jacksonville For Life. You are listening today with Melissa Ohden, Abortion Survivors Network founder, and she was telling us about when she was 14 and how she found out that she was a survivor of abortion and how that affected her. So you learned that when you were a teenager, Melissa. Was there a need you felt to learn more about your birth family at that point or later?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think part of that is just the typical adoptee search for self and your history. But yes, I had additional motives to find my biological family and ask them questions, right, to maybe figure out why that decision was made to try and end my life. But in the midst of that, the other part of that is that I wanted them to know that I'm not angry. I think we live in a world, even if people don't want to be supportive of my life or supportive of life in general, right, if they're for abortion, I think people still sometimes expect for me to be angry with my biological parents. And the reality is that I'm anything but that. I don't hate them. I love them in a way that I think people don't always understand because it's a selfless, nothing that I could find out would change the way that I love them kind of thing. But I wanted them to know that and that, I'm very blessed in this life. And so that's why I went searching for them for all of those reasons. So started looking when I was about 19 years old, and I didn't find them, and I didn't obtain my medical records until I was almost 30. It was 2007 that I finally found them.
So have you met either of your birth parents?
Well, let's see. How do I sum up a long story into a short one? I initially discovered that I was living in the same city as my biological father. I had moved to that city, the same city where my birth mother's abortion had taken place. I moved there during the 10 years of searching to finish my master's degree and really never thought for a second that I had family there. And there was my biological father. So about 10 years ago, I sent him a letter to his office, letting him know that I'm alive and well and not angry or bitter and, that I would be waiting if he ever wanted to connect with me. And I am still waiting today. I never heard back from him. But in reality, there was a good reason. He ended up passing away about 6 months after I sent him that letter. And I discovered that because I found his obituary on the internet one night and, was very grieved by that. I've been blessed with my amazing adoptive family, but I desperately had wanted to connect with my biological father, and suddenly he was gone. But, the beauty in that is that God always has a plan. And when my birth father passed away, his family actually found the letter that I had sent him. And so that's how they found out about me and the failed abortion. They never knew. He never spoke of it. And so they came into my life, my grandfather and my great-aunt, about 9 years ago now. And so they're a huge part of my life that I am forever thankful for. And in terms of my biological mother's family, it's probably even more a bit complicated. But about the same time in 2007, I found my maternal grandparents. and didn't know back then that my grandmother was responsible for all the things that she was. Sent them a letter asking for them to reach out to my birth mother on my behalf because I couldn't find her. And they very graciously corresponded with me through a couple of letters. And, unfortunately, through those letters, I learned that my messages would not be passed along to my birth mother because they were completely estranged from her. And I get that now. Now knowing that abortion was forced upon her at their hands, that makes great sense that their relationship was forever changed. And so, really lived in peace with that, knowing that I may never connect with my biological mother, but I have. About 4 years ago, another member of her family reached out to me, and that's how I found out that the abortion was forced upon her and that my grandmother was responsible for those things, and spent about 3 years connecting with my biological mother. That cousin of hers connected us. We shared emails, letters, pictures and those kind of things. But it was very difficult for us because there was actually one final secret about my life that even my adoptive parents didn't know. And that is that my birth mother lived over 30 years of her life believing that I had died that day at the hospital. She didn't know that I survived. That abortion took place over 5 days, physically, emotionally, mentally. She was in no place to know what was going on around her. And certainly to force the abortion upon her, things were done to her that took away any ability for her to really fight for herself. And she was just told that day, don't look at it, it's a monster. And so she never knew. And it was kept a secret. She didn't place me for adoption under her own free will. And so that's why it was so difficult. This was all new to her, and, she had to learn to trust that I love her and that I've forgiven her and that I support her in this world, and I'm trying to do good with the evil that was done to both of us. And so we spent a few years learning to get to know each other and trust one another, and we met face-to-face for the first time about a year ago.
How was that?
It's one of those things that's really hard for me to put into words, right? I've been given this gift to communicate this story with the world, but when it comes to meeting her, I suddenly get kind of speechless. It was incredible. It was like everything I ever could have wanted and more so. We met in a public place, and one of my half-sisters was there, and part of me wanted to run away. I'll be very honest. I turned to my husband and said, I am just going to go, right? And I knew in my heart I wouldn't, but it was the most nervous feeling I've probably ever had. And when I met her, right, I looked at her and we embraced, and I just said, it's been a long time. And, of course, we cried. But that day has been just the beginning of something that the world tried to end nearly 40 years ago. Now, my birth mother's now a big part of my life. We, email and text multiple times, sometimes a week. We try to get together as much as schedules allow us to, and I don't know if I can accurately depict to anybody how incredible this is. And we both know what a gift this is. How many tens of millions of women would give anything to have this opportunity, to know that their child is alive, to have their child in their life, to know that they're forgiven and loved. My birth mother knows that this is a blessing.
That is amazing. Now, you mentioned you're married. How has this been, for your husband and with your marriage?
Yeah, it's one of those things, right? My husband and I laugh about it a lot because my husband and I have known each other forever. We went to high school together. Our very first date, I told him the whole story, right, and just kind of said, if you don't ever talk to me again, I'll know that you're not in it with me, right? Like, I am pro-life. I don't know where God is leading me. I think I'm supposed to, give my life for pro-life ministry. And, so if I don't ever hear from you again, that's okay, right? Well, of course, he was there the next day and every day thereafter. And truly, I would not do this without him, because he is the greatest support, and he understands this is our ministry, not just mine, right? This is our family's calling to give of our lives to the world and let them see that this is what abortion looks like. It was meant to end my life. It would have meant that our children never would have lived. We have 2 little girls who are 9 and almost 3, and so he knows that this is our calling, and I'm so thankful for him.
That is a blessing for all of us. Now, you now work in many areas of pro-life ministry, including the post-abortive healing and supporting other survivors. Can you tell us, a conservative estimate on a number of survivors that are out there with us?
Yeah, it's hard to get to that number, right, of how many survivors, because we just don't even have accurate reporting of abortion numbers in many states. But, statistically, I saw somebody run numbers based on Centers for Disease Control data, and they were estimating that there could be as many as 44,000 survivors of late-term abortion in the United States alone. That's just an estimate. But what I can tell you is that through our efforts with the Abortion Survivors Network, I've had contact with 212 other survivors. And I know that number out there is much, much higher than that. That's simply the number that is connected with us and have passed along some information about their lives. And so I hear from survivors or their friends or family nearly everywhere I go. It's one of those things that just is not talked about that often. And most survivors will never speak of what happened to them, because of their own circumstances, their own suffering, and really because we live in the world that we do that try to silence stories like ours.
Now, what would you say to those who are post-abortive, Melissa?
Well, if they're post-abortive themselves, first of all, I would say, please know that you are loved, and there is forgiveness and healing to be found even after abortion. And for those who are survivors, I would say, you don't need to feel ashamed and embarrassed about who you are, no matter what our culture says about who we are. That is not, where our strength and our worth comes from. And that the Abortion Survivors Network exists to support survivors. So people can reach out to us. They can send us a message at info@theabortionsurvivors.com. Find us on Facebook. Find us on our website, theabortionsurvivors.com. Listen to other stories. We can connect you with other survivors so you don't feel alone in this. And, if you need connected to counseling services or ways to get involved in pro-life efforts, that's certainly something we assist with also.
Briefly, we're just about out of time. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention your book, You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoirs.
Yes, my first book. I say first because I know, in my heart I have other books that I need to finish. But my first book came out earlier this year. People can find it on my website, melissaohden.com, or on Amazon, or wherever books are sold. I think that's how the little saying goes. But, it's my opportunity to share this story with the world, and so people can hear or read about some of the things I've talked about today. But certainly the book goes much deeper into my life and really the dynamics when it comes to abortion, how it affects men and women and families, and ultimately our communities. And so I'd like to think it's not only a good read for a lot of people, but an important read when it comes to pro-life efforts.
I agree. Plow Publishing House was kind enough to send me a copy and proof, and everything you said I agree with 100%. How can the pro-life movement... Oh, you're more than welcome. How can the pro-life movement be more supportive?
Oh, that's a tough one, right? For me personally, I take my role as a survivor very seriously, and I take the lives of other survivors very seriously. And so, I guess what I would say is, be so mindful and respectful of the fact that other survivors exist. and be willing to share our stories. If you come across someone's story, or maybe someone's on social media and lots of people are posting negative comments, be willing to be that one person who jumps in and shares the truth in love about life and encourages people to be respectful of survivors, because it's very hard to read the comments and to come across the negativity of people, and be willing to share our stories with the world in the hopes that it gets the message out about life. I think sometimes in the pro-life movement we can get so wrapped up in our particular organization or what we're trying to do, and sometimes we forget that there is this greater span of people and organizations that exist. And so I think we need to really be supportive of one another and share the efforts that other people are trying to do, including survivors.
Great. Melissa, I hate to interrupt, but we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us today and for all you do to promote a culture of life. We would like to thank the station for being faithful to his word and this opportunity, and thank you for listening today. For more information about local pro-life efforts, please visit us at jacksonvilleforlife.org. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Until next time, do something, save babies in Jacksonville.